All right, we're in Philippians chapter 2, where Paul is talking about Jesus being God and then coming here as a servant. And how difficult it was for Christians in the first century to get along. This second section that we're in here, starting with the therefore in verse 12, is all about now that Jesus was this example for us, now let's be that example to the people around us. But it was not going to be easy. It was going to be the most difficult thing they would have to do. But it was the Jews who actually persecuted the Christians. And they instigated, instigated against the Romans, trumping up the charges that they were wanting to worship a new king. Because in the Roman Empire, you worshipped Caesar as the representative of the gods. And it was seen as treason if you did not consider him that way. Paul had to tell people in his writings too that you pay your taxes. You show honor to whom honor is due. Obey the emperor. And at the time he wrote that was the emperor who was going to order him assassinated, murdered. But you do that just because we have enough trouble in this life. Yes, we have another king, but it's not of this world. Our kingdom is, how many times they tried to explain that in the first century, but Satan had done such a good job through the centuries that they could not see it that way. You serve a dead king. We killed him. And the tomb is empty. Yeah, because the disciples stole the body. How did they figure out who was a Christian and who wasn't? See, with Judaism, they could put guards at the door to the temple, and if a man came in, there was a question, they pulled him into the side rooms, to the side chambers, and he had to prove it. He had to open his robes and prove it. He was circumcised. He was allowed. Under Christianity, your question is a good one, and how could they prove it? Well, they would send spies into the meeting groups. And first of all, write down a list of who's there. Secondly, those who were truly committed would eat his body and drink his blood. And to the Romans, that was cannibalism. And that's how they could persecute the Christians. But we wonder why that was such a bad thing back then. But to them, it was all new. And it was dangerous. The Romans could not take this animalistic behavior, and they had to do something about it. And the people they paid them to be in positions of honor, expected them to do something about it. And so just meeting together could cost them their lives. That's why in Hebrews chapter 10, a lot of people in church will say that that's a command that we meet together on the first day of the week. It's not a command. It's what is called a hortatory subjunctive. Does anybody know what a hortatory subjunctive is? We have them in English. We do it all the time without realizing it. Hortatory comes from exhortation, encouragement. Subjunctive means it's subjective to the person's willingness to do it. So a hortatory subjunctive in English is, Russ, let's have lunch today.
I check with my people.
Okay. See, and that's the subjunctive part. The encouragement is, let's have some fellowship. And that, in Hebrews chapter 10, every single statement there is, let us. So some of my friends used to call them the garden passages because they all start with let us. Let us encourage one another daily as long as it is today. Let us not give up meeting together. See, it's hortatory subjunctive. In all of the concordances you will look at, it will tell you the type of wording it is in the sentence. It'll have hort subj. That's a hortatory subjunctive. It's not a command. We're not commanded to meet together. But that doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't mean we don't need it. Does anyone have to command you to eat every day? But you know you need it. Do you have to be commanded to exercise? Yes, I do. But, you know, it's good for you. You know, you need it. The early Christians didn't need a command to meet together. They knew they needed it. They met together to be together because that's sometimes when they got their only meal. And that's why they called it a love feast. That's why the early Christian writers mentioned that it was the one good time in the week. Or, now they actually met daily, and it doesn't mean that every single person met together every day. They met with each other, and when they did, they shared meals. And when they thought about Jesus, and that's why Jesus says, whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup. He didn't give a specific time. He didn't even command us to eat the Lord's Supper. He just says, whenever you do, you proclaim the Lord's death till he comes. And so it was just a reminder for them. They would have a Bible study a lot of times. They would have a counseling session a lot of times. Sometimes they would go to someone's house who was ill or infirmed or discouraged, and they would have their love feast there every day. It wasn't really a worship day to God until Constantine legalized Christianity. And then they didn't even meet in buildings for the specific purpose until they were granted land occupation to build buildings for that purpose. They met in homes. They met in private homes. And Paul does mention that quite often in many of his letters. So that way, wherever the people were, that's where the church was. Today, this building is called a church. But it's not really, it's each of us. And then as we go out in the community, we are the church to the community, which fits perfectly with what Paul is saying here to the people. If we're the church, we represent church. I don't want to discourage you guys. I don't want to do anything that's going to bring shame on you. And we certainly don't want to bring shame on God. Therefore, we work out our own salvation, as he says here in verse 12, with fear, which is respect. Respect for each other, respect for God's character, and trembling. Because we got an enemy who's looking around the corners and everywhere. And he is lurking, waiting for an opportunity. And we have to be vigilant. And we have to be watchful. Does anybody need a handout? Right. Same ones we've been in. Okay.
Every time on television they say the church burnt, and I said, no, your building burnt.
Yeah, in the movie The Patriot, this comes up actually in Old Testament. Whenever they had a sacrifice and they lit it on fire, they would call it a firing. And in the movie The Patriot, Mel Gibson was in that one. It was during the War for Independence. They corralled the people inside the church building because they were helping out the people, the soldiers. They were feeding the soldiers in the field and clothing them and stuff like that. And they locked them in the church and barred the doors, and then the commander says, fire the church. Now, in our day and time, that would mean you're out of a job. No, they lit it on fire. And so Nadab and Abihu in the Old Testament, when it says they offered strange fire to the Lord, we think they got fire from a different location. There was only one fire in the whole tabernacle, and it was at the altar of sacrifice. That was the only fire there was. People didn't pass it underneath because the Levites were all around protecting it. They didn't have matches, they had tinder boxes. And what Nadab and Abihu did was offer the strange fire ring, the offering that God did not authorize, because the one they tried to provide was already provided. It's supposed to be done once a day by the high priest. So the sons, when they saw the explosion and everything, they thought that was cool. I'll do that. Okay, it wasn't a strange fire. It was an unauthorized firing that they brought. Their worship to God. They were basically saying, we can do this ourselves. And God, no. We're not. they're not the high priest. Now that we are in Christ, he's the high priest. We're co-heirs with him. We can bring our offerings to God. It won't be a strange firing. Anyway, how did we get on that? All right. Oh, I did have something here that Russ might appreciate. My yard, when I mow it, we're right across from the hardware and the grocery store, and with the big wind, we get a lot of debris. So my first hour before mowing is to go out and pick up all the trash. And yesterday I found someone's confession of sins. Someone's shopping list. Remember Russ's joke last night? I thought, Russ, maybe he'll appreciate that. So this, you can have that if you want to afterwards. That's fun. The lady.
I shared it with the Catholic yesterday. And this old family friend, she thought it was hilarious. She laughed and laughed and laughed.
Yeah, she left her confessions at Walmart.
She said, because I've heard people in confessional like that.
Oh, yeah? Okay, well, this one's coleslaw, black olives, tomatoes, and 1 onion. So, okay. Anyway, for our friends at home, you'll have to call me for that. All right. Here in Philippians chapter 2, then, we got down through, let's see, verse 14 says, do everything without murmuring and arguing. That Hebrew word comes from the time of the Exodus when people, all they would do is complain. They got into the wilderness and God forgot they needed water, didn't they? Don't we usually think God needs extra information? We need to tell God what's going on. Remember when God told Ananias, go to the house on Straight Street? There's a guy there named Saul. He's praying. Do you know this guy, what he's here for? Duh. Go. A lot of times we think God needs extra information, or the angels need to come and tell him something. No. But the Israelites thought that God forgot they needed water. Forgot they needed food. And then they got tired of that food. And every time they wanted to go back to Egypt, didn't they? I always think about what's better. The past. The good old days. I remember asking my grandmother when interviewing her about the Depression, what they lived through and everything. She would smile when she had all those memories. And one of the questions I had to ask her is, Grandma, were those the good old days? She changed completely from one extreme to the other. No, we almost starved to death. So she knew they weren't the good old days, but we usually think the past is. But God told them, you are not going back there, which bothered me. Because where did he send Jesus with Joseph and Mary? Over to Egypt. Out of Egypt I have called my son. One of the prophecies. So, yeah. See, that's what confused a lot of the people. They couldn't put 2 and 2 together and come up with 4 when Jesus was there. He was a 1. Yeah. All right. Anyway, verse 15. Paul wants us to become blameless. 2 things. And pure. Now, NIV puts a comma after pure and says a 3rd thing, children of God. Which I realized just today, I was a little bit later than usual because I got caught up in looking that up. It's a quotation from Deuteronomy. It's a quotation from Deuteronomy, where is it? Chapter 32 is what it is. Blameless? Are we blameless? No, we suffer the consequences of our sin all the time. Is it held against us? No. Now, as Christians, part of sanctification is becoming less like the world and more like Christ. So it's an upward movement. And think of David's life. Now, he was on cloud 9 with God, wasn't he? Until he watched a woman taking a bath. And it probably wasn't the first time he did that. Probably wasn't the first time she did that either. And he fell, didn't he? The rest of his life, he was coming back. But you read that through the Chronicles, through Samuel, he was never the same person afterwards. Even his own family, even his sons were killing each other. Even his advisors were trying to switch sides. He was just never the same person. But in God's eyes, he was blameless because he was still trying. He didn't give up. It doesn't matter where you were and where you fell and whether or not you got back to the top. We usually keep score that way. God keeps score in a totally different way. And David was still trying. And so he was still blameless. And so are we. As long as we are trying to be less like the world, more like Christ, we are blameless. And this is what Paul is getting to. The word for pure comes from the marketplace with a metallurgist. I can see it now that we're working where I am. There at Honda, we're casting our own aluminum cases for the transmissions. And sometimes they'll pour what they call the molten into the machine's bin. And that stuff is pouring out. And you can see it on the floor. It's real shiny, like chrome. And that comes from something in the Old Testament where the metallurgist watches over his silver. And what he does is burn off the impurities. The impurities stick to the side of the vessel it's in and the bottom. And it was stated then when the metallurgist was able to look at it and see himself, see his reflection, he knew it was ready. It was pure, unmixed, no alloys, only the metal he was working on. And that is what Paul is saying we need to become until Christ can be reflected in our lives. Then we're pure, unmixed with the world. So we've got to continue to work off the impurities. And then he says, children of God without fault in a crooked and depraved generation. How in the world can you keep it up when you're constantly being badgered and bothered by everybody who's trying to go the opposite way? And they do eventually convince you that you need to see things their way. Too many people. That's why the early Christians met together. That's why we meet together, is to constantly be reminded, get back on the path and on the right direction. But that actual quote comes from Deuteronomy chapter 32. It's what's titled the Song of Moses. That is actually even in the book of Revelation too. Sing the Song of Moses. And what it is a song of dedication and commitment to stay faithful. And it's in verse 5, the reason for this, the reason why it's all necessary. Moses says in his closing remarks, Deuteronomy is a second telling of the law. That's what deuteros nomos means. And it's his farewell address. Because after he published it, gave it to the Levites to continually read to the people during the wanderings in the wilderness, he died. Went up on a mountain, God buried him. He didn't even get to go into the land. He nor Aaron. Or Mary. None of them. Anyone over the age of 20, when they finally did the rebellion, anyone over that age wandered for 40 years and then died in the wilderness. None of them who left saw it. Two people. Joshua and Caleb. They were the only ones. And they stood up against the congregation who wanted to kill them. Good reference here. So Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 5. They have acted corruptly toward him, toward God. To their shame, they're no longer his children. They thought they were. They claimed it. Didn't the Pharisees and the Sadducees claim to be descendants of the faithful? But their actions betrayed them. They were not. They claimed to be his children, but they turned out but a warped and crooked generation. warped, not going to last very long. There is a test for our cases at work. This computer goes over different points of it and then prints out a visual of it just to see if in the setting after it heated up and now it's cooling, if it has warped. You can't use it if it's warped. It won't seal and it'll leak. Okay, we can see that in our parts, don't we? We don't want our auto parts leaking. And if it's crooked, you're not going to get there. Sometimes don't you wonder about these side roads? Yeah, who laid them out? I mean, I can look and see the plant that I work at from our backyard. I can see where it is. Yet I got to go 2.5 miles out of my way to get over there. Yeah, that's what their faithfulness is. It's warped, so it's useless. It's crooked. Can't get there. Yet,
Some of the roads follow the tributary
Uh-huh.
stream and also the animal path.
yeah, and the boundary lines of people's farms. Yeah, yeah. What is it? What was it on one of the Discovery channels? I was watching that one. How the states got their shape. You just gotta wonder, don't you? I mean, New Hampshire and Vermont, and then Texas. How did they get it? Crooked. You never know. Anyway, that's what we are to be. We are to be, and then at the end of verse 15, in which you shine like stars in the universe. Now notice that's a present tense, that's an active verb. And yet, it's something we do without even realizing it. Isn't it nice that you don't have to be mindful of telling your heart to beat every so often? Isn't that nice? We don't have to think about it. It just does it for us until one day it wears out. That's not our doing, though, is it? It's very similar to Jesus' parable about the sower who went out to sow. And he had the good parts there, and so he just dropped his seeds in the good spaces, right? It would have taken him all day for how many acres he's going to... Now he gets out there and he just throws it. Well, what about the stuff that fell on the pathway? Wasted. No, it fed the birds. The other one that fell among the weeds, it grew up, didn't it? So they are there, but they just really weren't into it, were they? Some actually produced a crop, but it wasn't very much and it wasn't very good, was it? No.
I thought about that this morning. As they were driving up, there was a beautiful soybean field with a stalk of corn.
What, I grew up in the city, so I didn't know anything like this, but Kathy grew up on the farm. She'll look out there and say, succotash. That's beans and corn together in a salad. Succotash is what they call it. Yeah, and that's, unfortunately, that's what we have to do. We cannot decide who deserves the gospel and who doesn't. In fact, there's nothing we can do about it. Evangelism is not something we do. We usually have organized programs of evangelism in it. The tree does not make its fruit, but the natural process of it being in the soil, taking the energy, that's just what comes out from the tree. Now, if you're planted in soil that's going to produce a scoundrel, that's the fruit that's going to come out. But if you're planted in good soil, you abide in me as I will in you, Jesus says, you will bear much fruit. It's not something we do. It's what becomes of our life. It's what comes out of our living. It's a natural byproduct of our being connected to Christ, is where we bear fruit. Yeah, we usually think it's counting the numbers. That's bearing fruit. No, but if it's people at work saying, oh, I have this joke to tell, but John's here. Come on over here. That's bearing fruit because they can see something in you. See?
I could see a new Christian being very discouraged by this.
Mm-hmm. That's hard.
I'm not blameless.
Yeah.
I can't do all this all the time. I'm
Right.
not perfect.
Yeah.
If they read that
Mm-hmm.
literally,
Mm-hmm.
instead of inserting the word, like you strive, and I'm thankful for modern translations,
Yeah.
because they break this down some, because I think people can get discouraged very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And then Paul later on says, hey, I'm not perfect, I do things I shouldn't, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. Now, perfect, that's the word.
I know, mature.
It doesn't mean flawless, but it means you're acting the way you're created. You're functioning the way you're created.
I'm just saying in translations,
Yeah.
you take
Yeah.
that, you never take it.
Yeah. In the book of Revelation, the one who overcomes
Yeah.
will receive all of this. Well, forget it. I'm not close to that yet. That's not what it says. The actual wording in the original says, to those who are overcoming.
But how many people see it?
No.
That's what I'm saying.
Can they publish a Bible if it says that? No. The people won't buy it. There was a publishing company down in Texas who tried to translate the word baptizo into baptize. We made a new English word out of it. It's not even an English word. But they tried to do that with their translation. It only lasted through 1 or 2 printings because no one bought it. It didn't say what they wanted. They translated immerse. People didn't want it.
The Baptist Church did that back, this is early 70s, like 70 or 71.
Yeah.
They did that. They translated the Bible and instead of baptized, they put immerse in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then they put commentary underneath that said, basically, that's really not what it means, But it so confused people
Yeah.
and got them to wanting to be baptized for remission of their sins.
Uh-huh.
They pulled it off the market after 3 years. I've got a copy of it.
Oh, neat. I used to have one of the Star Bible
Yeah.
New Testaments that did that.
I have a Messianic Jewish Bible.
Hmm?
It says immersed. It never says baptized, it says immersed.
Yeah, they have nothing to lose by it. Because that's what they did. That's John, his last name was not Baptist. That's just what he did. And they all knew, the Essenes at that time did it as a symbol. The old person's dead. What do you do with a dead person? You bury it.
It was part of the
And as they
Jewish
come
culture.
up out of the water, it's a new life.
Part of the Jewish culture, they had ceremonial washings.
Yes.
Which were baptisms.
Right. Washings, immersions. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, where were we? We shine like stars. This is what Linsky says. Linsky is one of this commentary here, and I don't necessarily read it all in a class. These are good. In fact, the members in my Wednesday morning class there in Roseville bought me the set because they thought I would appreciate it, and I do. But it's very intense, very detailed. If you're not really into the languages, you'll set this aside. Barclay's a lot better for that. You see the difference, right? Okay. But he says here that the wording of this word, that we shine like stars, the emphasis is not that other people see us. The emphasis is on the fact that with Jesus in us, we shine. Now, whether the other people see it or not does not matter. It's better and impressive if they do, because we usually go toward the light, don't we? Power was out at our house yesterday morning. Right away, first thing Andrea and I both did was get a flashlight, making sure everything's okay, and there's no tree down the power line or anything like that. So we had and saw cars driving by, and they slowed down and stopped. And they were looking in. They saw the light. All right, that's just what happens. Jesus, and I appreciate Russ bringing this up the past few weeks, because it does fit in here with what Paul is saying. City on a hill can't be hid. You can see it miles away. You can see it. It's awesome. I got pictures from my office window as a flight attendant. And every once in a while, because of what happened out in the Netherlands, when one of the pilots had to use the lavatory, one of us flight attendants had to block the way, but we had to step inside the cockpit until they got back. That was a big bonus for me, and they loved it too, because I'd done some flying lessons. I knew what they were doing and stuff. But I remember getting up there a few times, coming up the East Coast, and one of the guys was awesome. He was my favorite to work with. He said, the lights down here, that's Atlanta. Look up the coast there, and then he's naming the towns all the way up coast to New York. And you could see Philadelphia from 20,000 feet. That's amazing. But that's what happens with us. When we are blameless in Christ, being unmixed by the world, you can't help but be noticed. But it's not something we do. It's what's being reflected in us. And that passage I had you read from 2 Corinthians chapter 3, where Moses' face glowed after he had been with God. He had to put a veil on that to hide the fading. But Paul says there in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, we don't use the veil. The veil's taken away now that we're in Christ, because instead of the fading, we're increasing. And he talks about the aroma in 2 Corinthians. We're the aroma of Christ to those who are perishing and those who are improving, who are being sanctified. There's nothing you can do about it, because some of them, it's got a sweet aroma, and they're going to want to know more, and they're going to, what do you do when the smell is good? Can't get enough, right? But some people, it's a stench. What do you do with a stench? Try to clean it up, wipe it out. And there's nothing you can do about it. The same smell is a different reaction, different people.
Well, I think heaven's gonna smell like bacon and not turnips.
In some cases, I hope so. Okay.
Sweet aroma.
All right. Anyway, then, Paul then says that as we hold out the word of truth, this light shines. And it's not that we shine it. I like the word send the light. It's better though, this little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Because that's more the case. We send the light. No, we don't. We don't send it. We are the light. And wherever we are, we brighten the room. That's a good thing. And it's a bad thing. Because those who are doing what's wrong, what they know is wrong, are going to do what they can to snuff out the light. There's nothing we can do about it. Sorry, I'm a light. That's what I do. I shine. That's what we're supposed to do. Paul then wants to boast on the day of Christ that I did not run or labor for nothing. The day of Christ appearing. See, early in his writings, he was telling people, get ready, he's coming back any moment. But now in his later writings, he realizes this is going to take a while. So now we got to get busy. And we can't huddle ourselves together and take ourselves away from the other people. No, we have to go out to them.
And you know, that's really hard for us to think of our time as God's time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no comparison, and it's really hard as humans
Yeah.
to get ourselves out of being human, I guess.
We have our lives compartmentalized,
Yeah.
is how I've heard it before. We have a home life. We have a personal life. That's why guys like the men cave and the ladies like a she shed. They like to be alone. They like their own time. They like their me time. We have vacation. We have work. We have church. We have the marketplace where we're out among other people. And we see those as different compartments of our life rather than a complete, total, all-inclusive one life. Jack Exum, you remember him? He used to do that. He used to talk about the hats that we wear. And he had the names on the front of them. He has home put up there, and then you yell at the children, and you yell at your wife, and nothing else is going good at home. And then as soon as why were you so late getting ready? Because now we're going to be late for church. And as soon as you walk in the door, you take the home hat off and put on the church one and say, "Hello, brother. How you doing today?" And then you have another one that says work on the front of it. So isn't it embarrassing when you're at work, you're telling a dirty joke and you realize, uh-oh, I got my Christian hat on. Oh, no. Wouldn't it be nice? And he put out this big top hat that was all green glitter and flowers and everything and said Christian on the front. You put that on. Wouldn't it be nice just to wear one hat everywhere you go? Wouldn't it be easier? And isn't that what Paul is saying here? When we're out in the world, we reflect Christ. We're his mirror. And I do like a picture. I used to do PowerPoint with the sermons and everything. And I did see one picture where this guy is leaning over in a pool of water, where it looks like just a cesspool and everything else that's there. But where he's leaning over, it's a picture of what we consider Jesus to look like, reflected back.
I had ball hats made. You took them to Kenya with me one time.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody loved ball hats.
Mm.
And I had printed on the front of it, Canisa Marcusto, which means Church of Christ in Luo language.
Mm.
And they loved them.
It's an advertisement, isn't it? That's why in the book of Revelation, we're sealed with the Spirit where? Right on the forehead, right between the eyes. The mark of the beast could be on your arm because you can't see where the doctor had to take something off there. Yeah. That's the mark of the beast. You can hide that if it's not popular, stuff like that. You got it right between your eyes. Can you hide that?
With hair.
Not after my haircut. Okay. It's not easy, is it? I got up to do Lord's Supper one time when we were out in New York, and I took Kathy's receipt from her Dunkin' coffee, and I stuck it to my forehead. And I just went through like nothing was going to happen, and everyone's laughing, and they're talking. Can't miss it, can you? This, only those who are marked with the Spirit between their eyes. You can't take the mark of the Spirit here. Only here. They're the ones. Jesus comes, rescues us, and then all the bad stuff happens. We don't see it that way, though, do we? We see all the bad stuff happening. We're going to be protected from that. Yeah. Satan then is going to be held up on display and paraded, and then gone. Yeah, but that's only to those who are overcoming. And Paul wants to boast about that, even though we're not saved by being boastful. That's what he wants to boast for. That I brought them into the church. See how good they are. See how well they're showing the light here, and how many people are being interested. Yeah, and they're getting persecuted too. But yeah, they're staying firm. I did that. He wanted to boast about that. But he says in verse 17, even if I am being poured out like a drink offering, literally like wine. The drink offering comes from Numbers chapter 28, 29 with all the list of what you did with the animal, and then how you placed it, and where you put the blood and everything else. And then at the end, they were to pour the drink offering on top of it as a visual effect. What happens when alcohol hits burning embers? Boom! That's what impressed Nadab and Abihu. That's what hey, let's do that. Fireworks, let's do that again. That's the last of it. That means sacrificing is over. It's done. So Paul says his work as a Christian minister, even if I am being poured out like the drink offering on sacrifice and service coming from your faith, even though this is the end, I'm glad. And I'll rejoice with all of you. So you too, be glad and rejoice with me. You know what that reminds me of? the time of the exile, when Ezra the priest was reading to the people the book of the law that they refused to follow. They were crying when they realized where they should be and what they should have been doing. And Ezra denounces them for doing it. No, you don't. You will get happy. Is it easy to get happy when you're sad? You will not do this. This is to be a celebration of how God has brought us back and restored us to the land. You will not be crying and weeping. The joy of the Lord will be your strength. That's what we need to be mindful of in this crooked and depraved generation. Remember how our actions make them mad, make them want to snuff us out, but it brings joy to the Lord. And that is what our goal needs to be, to please God. That's why we work out our salvation with respect and vigilance. That's a cool thought, isn't it? The joy of the Lord will be your strength. All right, we'll pick up from there then next week.